Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to my daily YouTube live. We are studying the book of Esther, and currently we are on chapter 7. It gets really good during chapter 7. For those of you that are reading ahead, you already know what I'm talking about. But okay, let's just do a quick recap before we get into it. So where are we? The last chapter. And finally, the day of the banquet comes where Esther is to finally reveal what she needed from the king. So if you remember, she was a bit hesitant to even call to the king for his help in the matter because they were saying that if she asked for the king's attention before she was called on to get attention, then she is risking death. And the only way that the king could save her is that he would have to reach out his golden scepter to allow the quote unquote interruption. So, So just that happened. She came to the king for his attention and he was receptive to it. It wasn't an issue at all. In fact, he assured her that he is not bothered by her presence in which she performed, that he said, whatever you ask, it's yours. So she had a plan and she said, I'm gonna do this banquet and I want not only you to come, but I also want your official Haman to come. And then I'm going to reveal exactly what I want from you. So the first time that she was able to get their attention, the first banquet that she prepared, she had a change of heart, or maybe she didn't have a change of heart, but she said, I'm going to do another banquet. So we're going to run this back and then I'm going to tell you in the next banquet what I really need. So that bought some time. And in that time, Haman went home and he was boasting about his experience of being the only other person that was invited to join the king and the queen in the banquet. So he felt very special in that he had got advice from his wife and his friends that he should just go ahead and get Mordecai done with and over with and impale him on the or hang him on the whatever it's called. So he was excited about this plan. He was going to do it first thing in the morning. But lo and behold, when he came to the palace early in the morning, the king had actually pulled an all-nighter and he was thinking about some things. He wanted to read back one of the history books, and in the history books it showed that Mordecai was actually saved his life, in which he prevented the assassination that his old officials were plotting against him. So the king had this awakening that said, well, wait a second, because this happened 5 years ago, and how was Mordecai honored for saving my life? He wasn't. So we got to honor him. So when he saw Haman, he was like, come on in. What do you suggest should be done in order to honor somebody that I want to honor? What would you suggest? And Haman, in his selfishness, thought that the king was actually talking about him being honored. So he suggested what he would like to be done, which is to ride on the king's horse with the king's covering and everything, and to be honored, and it's going to be announced throughout the streets. And then the king revealed that the person to be honored was actually Mordecai. So Haman is shook, to say the least. And when he went home, he told his family what had happened, and his family warned him and said, okay, well, if this is the case, then clearly you cannot defeat this Mordecai guy. Just leave it alone. This is not your battle. So that was the advice that was given. And then that kind of just brings us to chapter 7. So chapter 7, the king executes Haman. I know, spoiler alert, we already gave it away. So it says, the king and Haman went to Queen Esther's banquet on the second occasion. While they were drinking wine, the king again said to Esther, "Tell me what you want, Queen Esther. What is your request? I will give it to you, even if it is half the kingdom." Queen Esther replied, "If I have found favor with the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my request, I ask that my life and the lives of my people will be spared. For my people and I have been sold to those who would kill, slaughter, and annihilate us. If we had merely been sold as slaves, I could remain silent, for that would be too trivial a matter to warrant disturbing the king." What is Esther doing right there? She's making it not only in her best interest, but she's also giving him a reason why it's in his best interest for the Jews to be saved. She's saying that we're no good if you kill, slaughter, and annihilate us. Now, if it was a matter of us being slaves, then you could still benefit from that. But there's absolutely no benefit for this. And, this is something that is so big of a matter that I had to disturb you. So she is kind of playing to the king's ego a little bit in this. So then it says, the king said, or King Xerxes demanded, "Who would do such a thing? Who would be so presumptuous as to touch you?" Esther replied, "This wicked Haman is our adversary and our enemy." Haman grew pale with fright before the king and queen. Then the king jumped to his feet in a rage and went out into the palace garden. Haman, however, stayed behind to plead for his life with Queen Esther, for he knew that the king intended to kill him. In despair, he fell on the couch where Queen Esther was reclining, just as the king was returning from the palace garden. The king exclaimed, "Will he even assault the queen right here in the palace before my very eyes?" And as soon as the king spoke, his attendants covered Haman's face, signaling his doom. Okay. Then Harbona, one of the king's eunuchs, said, "Haman has set up a sharpened pole that stands 75 feet tall in his own courtyard. He intended to use it to impale Mordecai, the man who saved the king from assassination." Ooh, adding some insult to injury. "Then impale Haman on it." The king ordered, so they impaled Haman on the pole he had set up for Mordecai, and the king's anger subsided. Wow. So basically, Haman dug his own grave. Haman not only honored his own enemy by giving the king the formula of how to honor his quote-unquote arch nemesis Mordecai, he also ended up, ironically, setting up his own death because he was trying to set up this honor for himself. It ended up being for Mordecai, and then he tried to set up Mordecai to death and ended up being killed in that very way. If that isn't a lesson in being humble, I don't know what is. And you can't tell me, like I said before, that God does not have a hand in this book, because there's too many coincidences. The irony of it all shows that God was orchestrating this whole entire show. It's not that the king is just this very sensible king all of a sudden. He's not sensible at all, really. Because if you think about it, the king was the one that authorized the annihilation of the Jews. Haman presented it, but the king co-signed it, right? So now he's acting like he's never heard of the plan before. He's acting like, well, who would do such a thing? Well, you did, king. You were the one that allowed this plan to even go into effect. And now you're acting like this is the first time that you've heard it. So, like I said, God has his hand over everybody that's controlling this situation to the point where he put it in the king's heart to be open to suggestion. That's one, because the king's not always open to suggestion. He put it in the king's heart to explore the history books so that he could see that Mordecai was actually the one that had his back the whole time. And not only that, but the timing of everything. The fact that Haman was in the courtyard at the time of the king coming up with the grand gesture for Mordecai, the timing that the sharpened poles were put up right before the banquet, so that not only it seemed fast at first when you were reading the story, you were like, oh my gosh, well, what if he impales Mordecai before the queen could save Mordecai? But I feel like the poles being up standing was kind of the factor that showed that Haman was actually guilty. Because it's one thing for the queen to say, well, it's Haman, he's our foe. But it's another thing for the other officials to be like, yeah, she's right, because look, he's got those sharpened poles all up and ready to go in order to assassinate Mordecai. So it further proved her point. And like I said, he dug his own grave because the poles were there waiting for him, and that was his own doing. So that is chapter 7. It was very, very short, but that's my 2 cents on it. I'm going to go ahead and open up the discussions in the comments section. What do you guys think about it so far? If there's anything that you would like to add, now is the time. Kratos says, wait, really? You said God is controlling everything. If that's true, then what's the point of free will? That's a great question. So it's not that God controls our free will, but especially in books of the Bible, God places certain things into our hearts, and it may or may not cause a different trajectory in our decisions. So God is constantly always trying to get our attention. A lot of us ignore God's tellings. So that's on us at the end of the day, because we don't have to listen. The king didn't have to slow down his plans and listen to Queen Esther. He didn't have to do that, but there was just something that was put in his heart to look at the books, and that made him react. So yes, we still do have free will, but God will constantly guide us. It's just up to us whether we decide to listen or not. And then another thing that stands out to that question is when the Egyptians or the pharaohs had the people as slaves, and it was like, let my people go and whatnot. And it said, the Pharaoh's heart was hardened. So God was the one that hardened the Pharaoh's heart. It may not necessarily be that the Pharaoh was necessarily bad. And that's why it's very important for us to not try to lean on our own understanding for everything. Because sometimes God uses you whether you like it or not. And you may be used in a way that you perceive as bad, but it has its purpose. So just like a person that you don't necessarily agree with the way that they're living their life, they may be living their life for the purpose of God. And like I said, we cannot and will not understand it in this lifetime. But God may harden our hearts for certain reasons in order to prove his grace in the long run or whatever. And now hindsight is 2020, and then we understand it. But yes, we still do have free will, but things are often put into our hearts to guide us, especially in the books of the Bible, because they are examples of how the standard of living. Philemon says, I was thinking something else. Examples of good and bad parenting as far as leading by example. Mordecai, good parent, and Haman, bad parent. Okay, it's kind of a different topic. But yes. Nate says, God is providentially directing all the timing of the events. Esther discerned the right time to speak, and the king grew eager to hear her request. He walks in on Haman at that exact time he's in her chair. God's hand all over the timing. Yeah, exactly. The timing of everything is, like I said, it's not a coincidence. God knows what he's doing. We still have the free will of how we want to react, but we're going to see things in that right time at the right places. Forex says, Esther came through for her people. She absolutely did. And that also exposes why she was even in the palace in the first place, because if it was another queen that was not Jewish, she probably would not have had the motive to react. She probably would have stayed silent, but Esther couldn't stay silent. It's not that she came through, it's that she had to come through. I'm not going to say, you know, like to be entitled of Esther reacting or anything like that, because she also could have stepped back and ignored it. But like Mordecai said, don't think for a second that if you stay silent, you're not going to be affected by this in the long run, because at the end of the day, this is going to be on your conscience, and you are of us. You're one of us. So you're going to be taken down whether you like it or not. And he was right. Nate says, when it says Haman was near Esther, the Greek word used is epipito. It is used here, which literally means to fall on someone or to throw yourself at someone. Yes, the king co-signed it. He spent some time in the garden and came back. We see God working in the lives of Esther, and Mordecai has his hand in touching the heart of the king. God works his will, yes. Okay, Christian says, short chapter, but straight to the point. Exactly. Haman pretty much dug his own grave by plotting against Mordecai. Perfect example of, I will bless those who bless them, but curse those who curse them. That's a great reference. Excellent. It's definitely a great example. Nate says, Esther in her request is humble, very cautious, and even submissive to the king in her speech, showing gentleness as well. Yeah, she played the long game in the end of the day. She knew exactly who she was dealing with. She was very thorough in her plan. And that's what makes me believe that maybe it wasn't that Esther just chickened out the first time that she had the first banquet. I think she did have a plan all along, and not only that, but I think that God guided her to the right timing, because if she had presented her idea that first time, then like I said, Haman wouldn't have put up those polls, so it wouldn't have led to his immediate visibility of guilt. And the timing of Haman being in the courtyard at the time so that he could kind of lead the king and how to honor Mordecai and be in that place and realize that Mordecai was more important to the king than he had thought. So yeah, like none of that would have happened. It would have been a matter of, is the king just going to listen to Esther and her requests? And then he would have to decide, like, okay, who am I going to believe, the queen or Haman? And then that would have been a whole different story. Mark says, same knife, kill sheep, kill goat. Yep. He dug his own grave. Okay, and then let me scroll down to the bottom. Oop, I missed a lot of comments. Hold on. Wendell says, absolutely, regarding Pharaoh, God said for this because I raised him up. That's one of my favorite stories because it made me realize that our purpose might not be the cookie cutter version of what we think our purpose is. And also it made me realize that I can't blame humans for how they react in certain things. We're all human, but we all serve a different purpose. So even though I may not agree with how someone acts, I don't know the root of why they're doing what they do. So it's another reminder that you have to focus on you and your own journey. And you also have to forgive yourself for certain things that you do. I'm not saying that you can just be forgiven for any kind of crime that you may commit, but you know, knowing is everything when you're not ignorant to what you're doing. But you never know. You really never know. And the only thing that we can do is to ask God for guidance and to trust God in his guidance. Trusting God goes a long way, because when you really surrender to your purpose, that's when all that clarity may come into fruition, because when we lean on our own understandings, it doesn't make sense. I can try to make sense as much as possible, but it's just not going to, because we don't know until we get there. And it's just like when we're kids and our parents tell us not to do things, and none of it makes sense because we're trying to go off of our impulse and what feels good. And then 20 years later, when you start seeing yourself being like, oh my God, my mom was right, or oh my God, my dad was right, and then you're like, okay, well, I'm glad that I listened, or man, I should have listened. So sometimes we have to be patient and just trust the process. Mark says heart is spiritual, mind is ego. Nice. So Xerxes as king couldn't be wrong. Right. Forex said God put her in the right position. He sure did. Philemon said her food was probably excellent too. Quite possibly. Christian says maybe God allowed the delay as an opportunity for Haman to repent, but it never happened. Ooh, I like that. And you know what? Because remember, he went back to his family twice to express the situation. And the first time his family enabled him, but the second time they actually warned him and they said, leave it alone. So he did have an opportunity to repent, yet he didn't. That's an excellent point. I think that that's probably my biggest takeaway of this chapter. And that's why it's so important for me to do these reviews, because like I said, just as you guys are reading and you guys are learning, I'm learning with you. So I really appreciate that. Two days time enough to get cool again with the king, because what was said earlier, definitely time to put up the pole and everything else, like bigging up Mordecai, right? His ways are higher than our ways. Trust God always. Amen. Proverbs 3:5-6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all ways submit to him, and he shall direct your paths. It's what I live by. Clarity does come with God leading. Absolutely, God leads, and I know where he leads by what I do, what I keep him in my presence, working in me, and open to just following. Okay. I think that's it for today. Thank you guys for your participation. Thank you guys for keeping with it. I know that sometimes it's like life happens and we get busy, but I've seen a lot of the same names that are present in this book review, so that tells me that you guys are still with me, and that means a lot, because it's important to like have our village and to kind of discuss things more like in depth, rather than somebody that's just coming for one chapter and they don't really know what's going on. Like, I feel like we're on the same page. So that's excellent and very humbling. But I will be back tomorrow. So same time tomorrow, 6 p.m. Eastern time. And we are going to discuss chapter 8. So now that Haman's gone, I guess we're going to see what happens next. There's only 10 chapters. So it's kind of like this is the climax of the story. And yeah, we'll see. Tune in tomorrow. Ciao.